Welcome to Think Tech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidell.
And I'm Loire Winged.
In our show tonight, we'll cover the 2011 Legislative Review presented by the Hawaii Venture Capital Association and Think Tech Hawaii on May 26th at the Plaza Club.
HVCA and ThinkTech regularly cover events and issues affecting state government. And every year after the legislative session is over, we cover what happened in that session.
This year was particularly interesting because we had a new governor with lots of new ideas and initiatives. At the same time, the state has had money problems, and the session was troubled by the need to balance the budget, as required by our state constitution.
Lots of important bills failed this year, some simply because of tension between the Senate and the House. At the end, there was disappointment from many quarters, including the administration.
That considered, we thought it would be important to get speakers for our program who knew what happened and who would give us straight talk. We think we succeeded in that, but you can be the judge.
Our speakers were Neal Milner, longtime political commentator, Char Blair, star reporter from Civil Beat, Sam Slom, state senator, and Andrew Aoki, policy advisor to the governor. Wow, what a panel. The first panelist was Neal Milner, retired political science professor from UH and a well-known political commentator.
The word that I want to use is to describe the session is same, or same, or a sense of sameness. And what I mean by that, I want to look at it in various ways. First of all, I want to suggest that even though we have a governor who is certainly identified as a liberal, and a legislature that's overwhelmingly Democratic, liberals and Democrats in state government right now in decision-making positions are essentially like Republicans in the positions in many ways. There are some important differences, and I'll point them out. That is, because of the mandates to balance the budget, all Democratic governors have become fiscally conservative. Now, again, there are some very important differences here, but by necessity, they've become much more involved with budget cutting, much more involved with reducing what we used to call the safety net. Now, there's some, and reducing, in a sense, the degree to which the welfare state operates as a welfare state. So, in that sense, we are in the same boat in lots of other ways. And in fact, some of the more cocky conservative governors like Rick Perry of Texas, who a couple of years could say, you know what, we operate differently and we have a big surplus, no longer has a surplus. He's now in the same boat because the state of Texas had a very large deficit that they'd have to deal with. So in a sense, it's kind of a same boat. New York Times today criticized Governor Andrew Cuomo. This is Mario Cuomo's son. This is the son, the liberal son of a liberal Democrat, for the following: for refusing to add a surcharge to the wealthy for taxes, for cutting education way back, and for putting a cap on property taxes, a cap. And the New York Times, which certainly its editorial page is left of center, accuses the Democratic administration of essentially creating a Proposition 13. A Proposition 13, now that may be exaggerated, but the important significance of that is that this is a Democratic governor. And what you had in this state, in many ways, is essentially a reduction at the behest of a Democratic governor, and certainly one who would be proud to be identified as a liberal, of some very important social services, out of necessity. Not so much out of ideology, but out of necessity. Reduction of Medicaid, social services are certainly sinking. Whether you think that's good or whether you think that's bad or whether you think that's an opportunity, as conservatives tend to think, Republicans tend to think, and I'll come back to that, or whether you think it's a necessity, bottom line is that governors and legislators have been pushed more into a same boat situation because of the mandates of the fiscal crisis. Not just that there is a crisis, but that you have to balance the budget. You can't print your own money. You can't operate at a deficit. You know, I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago. A few of you were here. I know Lisa was here. Where they asked the people from the Council of Economic Advisors, you know, the Council of Revenues here, about what the answer to that question is, and they say, you know, essentially, in effect, they said, we don't know. We don't know. That it's very, very hard to tell. And I can't do any better than that. I think certainly this is a this is always in motion because the revenues change. What we always do is the best kind of estimate.
The next panelist was Chad Blair, star reporter from Civil Beat. Before that, he covered politics for Hawaii Public Radio and for Pacific Business News.
Okay, my 6 points. The first is perplexing. Perplexing is my word for what happened in the legislative session, and it leads to my second point, and the main reason is I expected, I think many people expected, that there was going to be more that came out of this session because of the governor's landslide victories. I mean, he crushed Mufi Hanneman and Duke Iona. It was an enormous landslide, and came in with, they lost a seat in the Senate. Only Sam's the only Republican there. I think he picked up 1 or 2 seats in the House, but a really, I would say, a mandate to lead. And once it was all through, I think the public opinion poll that ran in the Advertiser the other day, 50% approval rating, is that what it was for the governor? So I'm still kind of trying to get my mind around that, why that happened. The third point I want to make is, given that Democratic unity, it's amazing how smoothly, how quickly 2 very big issues moved through the legislature. Civil unions. I mean, it wasn't even a year ago that the Governor Lingle, vetoed that bill. It was a very emotional situation. I was there in July at the Capitol on that day, and you had supporters dressed in, I think, white shirts, and then, supporters of civil unions dressed in rainbow-colored gear, and opponents of civil unions, many religious groups, wearing white. And people were praying, and people were singing. It was a very emotional deal. And within less than a year, civil unions sails, zips right through the legislature with quite a lot of people voting for it. So that's one thing. The other thing is the appointed Board of Education. I realized that came from a voter mandate, that the voters asked to have the governor appoint the members. But it moved through very quickly, very smoothly, showing how a Democrat-controlled legislature and a governor of the same party can get business done. Having said that, the Medicare Part B reimbursements that Neal talked about in the pension income tax, as well as the soda tax, shows you how difficult there can be agreement on these kinds of issues. I give the governor credit for raising these issues. He says he's going to bring them back again next year. Maybe Andrew can update on that, but he told me as recently as last week, yes, I'm going to bring these issues back. I give the guy credit for thinking, if you will, outside the box and taking on the ARP, very difficult issues to find a way to bring in the revenue to balance the budget. Those issues are not going to go away. I'm not taking a position on any of them either. As a journalist, I should not. There's no question the public has an opinion. We brought up the ARP. You know, one of the things that they did, I think very effectively, was, I mean, they're very well organized, and they put the word out early and often about lobbying lawmakers on particularly the pension income tax, but also Medicare Part B reimbursement. And I think they know. I think every lawmaker knows, as the point has been made earlier, the people that are most likely to vote are older citizens. They vote the most consistently. They have the most at stake in many ways. And I think that's an example of fact that the legislature did reflect. Just one example of what the public wanted. Raising the soda tax. You know, the governor has a very strong point about this. Sodas are not good for you. We could use that money. We could use some of that money to fight obesity programs. It's happened in other jurisdictions across the country. Of course, it was opposed by bottlers and so forth. But my guess is most people who drink soda don't want to pay more for their sodas, which are already expensive. So guess what? They voted it down. So I hope I'm answering your question. Yes, they do have influence, as they should. That's their job. So.
The next panelist was Sam Slom, longtime state senator. He's the only Republican left in the Senate. As you'll see, he's very outspoken.
My word is bankrupt. Fiscally bankrupt, bankrupt of new ideas, bankrupt ethically. That was your 2011 legislature. And I know there's disagreement and all that, but here is the rest of the story. First of all, as far as the budget and the question that Mr. Fidell had, let me tell you that I've been saying for months that the budget is not balanced. I said it at the end of the session at our 7th press conference. It is not balanced. And if anybody goes to the trouble that my staff and I went to add up every line item, you will find that this budget is not balanced. Now, are we in the same boat or the same canoe? No. I do not want to be in a sinking canoe or one that's underwater. Some of us know the direction that we want to go and that we think that the state should go if we're going to be profitable. But that is not the direction, in my humble opinion, that we went in or are going in now. Were there pronouncements of austerity and change and all this? Yes, there were pronouncements. There just wasn't anything to back that up. Now, let's keep a couple things in mind. First of all, the budget. $21 billion over the next 2 fiscal years, starting July 1st. Now, that's after getting over an approximate $232 million deficit that ends in the fiscal year currently 11, which ends on June 30th. 21 billion bucks. Now, when the governor first came in and first presented his budget to the legislature, the budget was an increase in expenditures. Now, the governor explained that and his staff as restoration of those terrible cuts and withheld expenditures by that last administration. By the way, I thought for a while I was in a time warp because in bills and testimony, people were still blaming the Lingle administration for their shortfalls. But there is real dislike between House members and Senate members, real dislike. And when the Senate, for example, said on the final day, 6 p.m., that's it. After 6 p.m., we're not negotiating anymore. I said, yeah, sounds good. Let's see if you stick to it. They did. They stuck to it. And that was one thing. There also is a dissension between unions, between and among unions. Because as you know now, the Native Hawaiians have been bested. They will not be the most favored nation in the state of Hawaii. The most favored nation goes to the HGEA. It's in their union contract. And what it says is that if any other union gets any other benefit, they will automatically get it as most favored nation. It's in the contract. So you had people in conferences, for example, said, we're done. We're not going to fund any of the collective bargaining agreements, which is the first time ever they did that. Part of it was because of money, but part of it was because we didn't want to do that. Chad brought up the interesting thing about the gambling bill and the Aloha Tower development. By the way, the other explanation was we'll house the gambling office inside the Aloha Tower development. The law says that you must have the contents of a bill that matches the title. And had that bill passed, it would not have passed muster. But again, to specifically answer your question, even if you're a Democrat on a conference committee, and they're made up of House members and Senate members, even if you're a Democrat on those committees, you have very little or no input whatsoever. You don't know what's going on because it's all behind closed doors. But this year, because of the animosity, because of other issues, because, as my colleagues told me over and over again, they were hearing from their constituents. People said, no, we're at an impasse and we're not going to do it. There's no sense going on with the charade like we usually do, defer, and then finally kill it. They just said, defer, we can't do it, it's over, it's done. And that's it. That was collective bargaining, and that was conference committees.
The anchor was Andrew Aoki, policy advisor to the governor. Andrew is an important member of the administration and of the New Day program.
When Bill said, sum up everything in one word, yeah, the thing that came to mind, the first thing that came to mind was Will Ferrell on Saturday Night Live. He was doing George W. Bush, and he was supposed to wrap up why he's the best candidate in one word, and he said strategery. Yeah. And so that's my one word, and I'm going to talk about our strategery coming in and everything else. So our strategery coming in was into the administration was just like anything else. You have to assess what's going on. So I think I was telling Jay that, you look under the hood. So we looked under the hood and we found, we found like a hamster on a wheel, basically. There's no motor there, you know, and that's what we have to deal with. I'll explain that a little bit later, you know, and then so how do we deal with where government is right now? And you look in the tool bag and you've got like dental floss, you know, a fake bouquet of flowers. It's like a clown bag. You have no tools to actually deal with this. It was like Apollo 13 with no duct tape. So most of us who came into this administration, like myself, we don't actually come from government. We didn't work in government before that. I don't know, most of us, but a lot of us don't. A lot of the people in the cabinet and on the governor's staff. And everybody says state government. We got to run government like a business. And I'm here to tell you the government is run like a business, a really badly run business. And I'll tell you exactly why. Government is, as you know, mostly a service business. 70% is employment of our expenditures, and people say that's a bad thing, but it's a service industry, basically, government. We primarily provide services. But where it's not probably clear is that, and we can debate whether the budget is balanced or not. I also agree that it's not balanced, and the way I see that it's not balanced is because of deep operating deficits within the functions of government itself, that they don't show up on paper, because on paper you can just eliminate functions and then they won't show up. Now, you can debate whether those functions are important or not, but we've cut down our service provision to such a point that if you were the customer, as all of you are as taxpayers, you'd probably be pretty upset as to what you're getting. It'd be like going to a store and forking out over some cash and not getting what you were promised. I think that, you know, and this is maybe put in focus at the legislature, but this is sort of the case all across of Hawaii, I think, which is our propensity to step on each other's toes. And I don't think it's necessarily a function of the last administration. I mean, we've had our bouts with being not unified around things over the decades on a lot of different issues, really. So how are we going to deal with that? I think, you know, part of it is to, I know it's interesting to dwell on conflicts, but at least I can say that this administration and your cabinet and all of those folks are really trying to focus on results, and we'll do everything we can to just focus on that. And the idea is that eventually people just come around after a while. It's just not that interesting after a while to be thwarting each other after a while, especially if you get success. And I think that's ultimately what everybody's got to judge by. Okay, I think over the next year or so, if you don't see things happening in the economy, if you don't see changes in the schools, if you don't see some of the progress that's been promised and needs to be delivered on, then that's fine, I think. But I'm pretty hopeful, actually, that things are going to start moving.
Bill Spencer then took questions from the floor and allowed each of the panelists 1 minute to wrap up.
Our Constitution requires not only that we balance the budget, but it also requires that if we have a surplus, that it be refunded to the taxpayers. Do any of you think that one or both of those provisions should be repealed?
I guess the answer to me is no to the balanced budget thing. That it would profoundly change the way states would have to do business, I think, in bad ways. This is not the federal government. We don't have the resources and the opportunities or the mandates to operate in a situation in which you have openness with a balanced budget.
But my question has to do with Act 221 and the pushing away of investment from Hawaii. That kind of stimulus is not out there. Maybe the governor's office has some ideas.
That particular industry is one that we need to have a focused plan on. We don't right now. We haven't. Right now there's a film office that basically all it can do right now, because it's been shrunk, is do permits and things like that, which is fine, that's important. But there's no real strategic plan in that arena in terms of building up a workforce and making sure that there's going to be jobs in that area. In general, though, economic stimulus across the board, those kinds of incentives, yeah, they've been they've been weakened dramatically. But in lieu of all the other priorities, those are the kinds of tough decisions that I don't think we're making in some kind of really conscious and strategic way.
I did like, of course, your plan. It all sounds great. How are you going to pay for it?
The focus in right now, I think, has to be on economic recovery, economic development, right? As the economy comes back, then there'll be more capacity, I think, to at least choose where those next investments go. The real question is, are we going to throw those away, or are we going to put it strategically into places like early childhood or wherever the big payoffs are, right? So I think the opportunities right now are super limited. We don't have the luxury to sort of do a whole lot of things poorly, as we've gotten good at. Gotten good at doing a whole lot of things poorly, right? What we need to get good at is doing a few focused things very well.
I just want to read a brief quote by David Brooks, who is certainly a Republican and arguably a conservative. It's about the national government, but I want you to think about how much of this applies to our situation here. He says President Obama thinks that he can address the fiscal problems without touching seniors or the middle class. That's truly voodoo fiscal policy. Republicans think they can do it without more tax revenue. That's voodoo too. So I think that it's worth examining that kind of quote when you think about the answer to these kinds of questions.
This was a great panel and a valuable discussion. As you can see, their remarks were both thoughtful and direct, and we greatly appreciate that.
All in all, the session seems to have been distracted by the budget and by political tension. Hopefully next year will be better, for them and for us.
If you'd like to see the entire program that was presented to the Plaza Club that day, check it out on thinktechhawaii.com.
And now here's our ThinkTech calendar of events going forward.
On June 23rd, ThinkTech, HVCA, and Pacific New Media will present Hawaii's big projects. What's holding them up? Reserve your seat for this program at hvca.org or thinktechhawaii.com.
And now here's Bill Spencer, president of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association, with this week's Spensation.
So one of the things that you talked about in introducing the program was this $13 million grant from the federal government. Can you tell us about that now?
Absolutely, Jay. It's a great program that was passed last year in the Congress to create jobs. And the Hawaii Strategic Development Corp found out about it and put in an application, and Hawaii has become one of the first states to get this money. Now, there are strings attached. The $13 million is used to go into venture capital funds that have to match that 10 to 1. So the good news is that it could generate about $130 million in dry powder. You know, and the venture community needs the money, and the entrepreneurs need the money.
I don't think people in general realize how important it is to have a fund of investment capital available for Hawaii businesses. Why? I mean, we've talked about this for years, but it's time to talk about it again now that this is happening. Why? Because it keeps the kids here. The entrepreneurs are the kids.
That's right.
This gives them a life. Without investment capital, they'll go away.
They'll go away, and we've had plenty of examples of that. Now, Act 221 was designed to keep people here. You couldn't leave before 5 years, or else your investors wouldn't get their tax credits. Now, this program is Hawaii-centric. and it's focused on job creation. But a lot of these companies are past the R&D stage and ready to start implementing their business plans, commercializing, and hiring staff. And so this will create jobs, but it's going to require people in the community to put money into venture funds, which will then professionally allocate investments to companies that have promise.
I get the impression from hearing you talk about this that you don't see it as exclusive, that there are other possibilities too, that we can't rest our laurels on this one program.
No, Hawaii needs to build its own base of venture capital. We will not survive as an entrepreneurial community unless people in our community invest locally.
Thank you, Bill. Looking forward. Want to see this work.
It'll work. Just start writing those checks, folks.
Invest in Hawaii.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of ThinkTech. But first, we want to thank our underwriters.
Thanks to the Scheidler Family Foundation. Jay Scheidler, through the Scheidler Family Foundation, supports a number of educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including ThinkTech.
Hawaiian Electric Company. HECO and its affiliates Miko on Maui and Helco on the Big Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho. Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company which has a large presence in and commitment to Hawaii.
Oceanit, a local tech company, is one of Hawaii's largest and most diversified science and engineering companies.
Don't forget ThinkTech. We're funded by gifts and grants from people like you. Please help us out by making a contribution on thinktechhawaii.com. It'll help us with this program and with all the other things we do to raise public awareness about tech, energy, diversification, and globalism in Hawaii. Thank you so much. Okay, Laurie, that wraps up this week's edition of ThinkTech. Remember, you can watch ThinkTech on OC16 several times every week. Can't get enough of it, just like Duke Oishi. For additional times, check out oc16.tv.
For lots more ThinkTech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on ThinkTech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a sponsor. Help us reach Hawaii.
I'm Jay Fidell. Thanks for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Loire Winged. Aloha, everyone.